Now, the whole world is standing by right now and watching what the UK is going to do now that Iran has seized one of their oil tankers. We're seeing something very significant here. How many countries do you know of? And how many of those countries, having been victims of imperialism or being currently pressured by imperialism, who've had the audacity to steal a British ship? No one that I can think of. Now, this whole situation is a diplomatic nightmare for the UK. Let's be realistic. The UK is part of the imperialist bloc in the world. They're an imperialist power themselves, but not as strong as the United States. And this they can largely attribute to their colonial history. So they've had that history of the perception of the right to rule over other countries. And this is not just the colonial era, but here, now, as well. But let's think about how important this situation really is. Clearly, there is a strategy to try to destabilize and destroy Iran. And in the last year or so, it seems very clear that both the actions of the United States and the UK are determined to instigate Iran into taking some kind of action that would justify an invasion of the country. So think about it. You've got this JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Iran promises not to build nuclear weapons, and the United States will stop putting sanctions that they frankly had no right to put on the country to begin with. Being that Iran was, and still is, in such a weaker position, they agreed to it. Okay, we weren't planning to build nuclear weapons anyway, so let's just go ahead, agree to their terms, hammer out at least a moderately fair deal, then we can be on our way. And that's essentially what happened. Iran went on to do quite well. They went on to develop economically much more than was projected by many specialists in the United States. And this had a very significant effect. The point of the agreement was not just to undermine Iran's ability to build nuclear weapons, but to try to undermine their economy as well. But at the same time, trying to give the appearance of being fair. I mean, if we really looked at it, who is the United States to tell anybody that they're not allowed to have nuclear weapons, particularly as a deterrent against U.S. invasion? Now, the U.S. has no moral right to make that kind of demand of anybody. But Iran knows, what can they really do about it? So they came to the table. They spent years hammering out a deal that would be relatively fair to Iran. But the U.S. didn't get what it wanted. Development in Iran still continued. Along the capitalist lines, absolutely. But they still have a lot of room to grow. They're not an imperialist state. Their capital has not developed to the point where they would need to become an imperialist power. And that's the thing that a lot of people forget about imperialism, is that it's not something that a country merely chooses to do. It's something a capitalist economy has to do by the nature of capital accumulation and expansion. So Iran's nowhere near even needing to be an imperialist power. So they can still grow domestically quite a lot before they need to start reaching beyond their own borders. So that's what they did. And as I said, they did better than what was projected by many commentators and experts in the United States. Well, this is no good. If you're going to undermine Iran and its development, well, it kind of didn't work. So now you're going to need something else. You could trash the JCPOA. That's the route that in the intelligence community did consider doing. You can just come up with accusations that the whole deal is not being followed by Iran, etc. And Obama, being in his last year or so in office, felt it wasn't really worth doing. And besides, every president still wants their legacy. And the JCPOA agreement is one of those legacies of Obama. That was one of the things he wanted to leave behind. So he didn't want to do it. Now, in steps Trump. Now he'll do all kinds of irrational stuff. He'll be off the wall, crazy, anti-diplomatic, outright destructive, full bull in a china shop kind of mentality. So he'll trash it, and he does. And the next thing we know, there's all these accusations that Iran violated the agreement, even though not only the European signatories to the deal certify that Iran was in compliance, but the International Atomic Energy Agency also, who carried out the inspections of Iran, said that they were in compliance. So Israel comes out with a bunch of complete and utter nonsense, and stuff that existed before the agreement had been reached, and some of it which had been scrapped. So the IAEA just dismissed their evidence as stuff that they had already seen before, or in stuff that was complete nonsense. So, even though they're proven liars, the United States continues to assert that Iran had violated the agreement. So we turn around and spend a year violating the very agreement that the United States demanded to begin with. And Iran keeps saying, this isn't fair, please return to the agreement, this can still work, we can still keep going, we don't need to do sanctions, we can cooperate, etc. So after a year of strategic patience, as they call it, they get fed up with it. We're trying to do the right thing. Okay, well, we've got these rights under the agreement that if one of the parties does not live up to their end, we can do A, B, C. So Iran does A. And the United States starts screaming that Iran is violating the deal that the U.S. already walked away from. So you see, like, the really great hypocrisy here and the blatant twisting of facts in order to make Iran out to be the bad guy, and the U.S., of course, the richest, most powerful country in the world, is always the victim. So they continue to violate the agreement even further, the United States does. So Iran says, okay, you still don't want to return, well, then return to the negotiation table, or just return to the agreement, period, the one that was already in existence and was already working. So they take the next step that they're legally allowed to take under the agreement, and the U.S. cries foul again. All of this could have been ended at any time by simply returning to the agreement that was already in progress. So now that it's clear that Iran isn't going to sit there and take this nonsense anymore, they are going to retaliate, and retaliate in a way that's perfectly legal for them to do so. So the United States has to come up with something else. So then they start, and again, this is rumors, but this is what I believe. The tankers that were recently attacked and blamed on Iran were probably attacked by Israel or Saudi Arabia. And then the United States asserted, without evidence or a grainy black and white video with no, actual substance to it, that Iran did it, to the point of absurdity that even Japan said, no, there's no evidence that Iran did it, and the company that owned the ship, the owners, stepped forward saying, no, Iran didn't do this. So it was a complete laughable claim against the country. And that didn't work. The international community, and we know what we mean by when we say the international community, still turned around and laughed at the U.S. We're not going along with your nonsense. This is not a justification. This is you. So, the U.K. steps in Gibraltar, uses the Royal Marines with the permission of the Spanish government, which is also an imperialist power, a beneficiary of imperialism, a junior partner, but one that still benefits from imperialism. So they seize a British They say seize an oil tanker. The crew from one country, registered company another, flag of another. And Iran says what they're doing is not illegal. Now, the EU has sanctions against Syria for daring to defy their interests. That you can't buy oil from Syria. But Iran wasn't buying oil from Syria. They were sending oil to Syria. Well, that's different. And then on top of that, Iran's not the EU. They're not in the EU. They're not obligated to go through or carry out any kind of sanctions that the EU wants to put on Syria. So they really have no reason for trying to enforce that. And Iran doesn't want to. So the European powers decide they're going to punish Iran anyway. Seize the oil tanker. Iran warns, release the tanker or there's going to be a problem. And the UK laughs it off, thinking Iran's not going to do anything. Oops. Because Iran then does turn around and seize a UK oil tanker, claiming that it was harmful to the environment, it was involved in an incident, or what have you. In either case, it's an oil tanker that was seized by Iran. And even the UK Navy wasn't able to get there in time to try to stop it from happening. And the audio recording of the incident was released, and the UK doesn't look, or the UK Navy doesn't look very good in it. But that's besides the point. Now the UK is all angry about it, about the oil tanker being seized. But you started it. You took a deliberate, provocative act to provoke Iran into an international incident, and then when they do something back to you, you lose your mind and say it's unfair. Now, there's a way of looking at this. Someone who feels that they can do things to victimize other people, but then portray themselves as the victim whenever you do something back to them. A bully. And the United States does this all the time. So, what's significant about this for the UK is the stupidity of doing it, period. With everything going on with Brexit, with the failing Conservative government, Theresa May's political career essentially being over, calling Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite, which isn't true. Very obviously is not true, because of course any criticism of Israel and the genocide that it carries out is automatically hate speech, right? So, they've got all this internal political turmoil going on, and whatever hostilities that they now have with the EU as a result of the Brexit. So they decided to just throw Iran in on top of it. I mean, that wasn't a very smart thing to do. In a manner of speaking, Britain's got some bigger problems right now at home that they need to deal with before they start projecting themselves in other countries where they're not wanted. And they have no moral right of actually being in this situation. So, now there's a great confusion, and the UK is threatening Iran with retaliation. You better release our tanker right now. And Iran says, well, we can have a diplomatic solution to this. It's okay. We can discuss this, and everything will be fine. There's certainly a diplomatic solution. You release our ship, you release yours. Oh, pardon me. You release our ship, and we'll release yours. Seems fair enough, and maybe the UK will learn a lesson out of this. If you want to be an independent country, and being opposed to being part of some greater union like the EU, out of ideas about your own sovereignty, etc., then maybe you should respect the sovereignty of others. If the UK has a history of anything, it's not respecting people's sovereignty. We can go into a whole huge history of British colonialism and the damage that it has done to the world, and the tens, if not hundreds of millions of people that have been killed as a result of the British Empire. And then we can talk about the U.S. Revolutionary War, etc. So it's amazing when the shoe is on the other foot how angry the UK gets. I was trying to think of something. When you anger Russia, it's called provoking the bear. And when you anger China, it's provoking the dragon. I was trying to think, what do you call that when you're provoking the UK? Provoking the Queen, or whatever. The point is, for a small moment, the UK is getting a taste of what it does to other people. A very, very small case. This is very small in compared to what was done even to a single country under British colonialism. And all of this could have been avoided by simply respecting the sovereignty of Iran, by not seizing their ship, or by respecting their own sovereignty, by not doing something just because the United States wants them to do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure the UK has a hand in what's the imperialist pressures against Iran, and I'm sure they would love to get all of their oil and whatnot back that they previously had a control of. But think about it. While it's going through this great upheaval of wanting to be independent and respecting their own dignity and sovereignty, yet continually violating that sovereignty of others. And that, as I previously described, is being a bully. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.